Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm Fred Kempe. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council. You can see by the overflow crowd, by the cameras in the back of the room, that we're involved at this moment, not really an event, but really a moment of history that we're all trying to understand, and all trying to understand how we can help it move in the right direction. I'm going to be very brief because there's so much else to do in this morning. I was just speaking to Julio Borges, the representative of the interim government of Venezuela to the Lima Group, and the former president of the Venezuelan National Assembly. And he'll say this on the record here as well, but he told me I could steal his line to launch this event. But he'll say this on the record. This is his thought. The Berlin Wall is falling down in Latin America. What happened in Europe 30 years ago is happening now in the region. I've talked to our team at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, and I've told them the next weeks, the next months could be pretty intensive. But as you're working on these things, it's only so often in a young person's history and career that you confront this kind of historic moment. The Atlantic Council has reflected on our purpose and our mission over the last 18 months, and we decided that there were 4 trends going, and I'll end with that because they all find themselves in the Latin American situation. The first was a contest between democracy and autocracy. And so this really gets to the heart of the well-being of the Venezuelan people, which is first and foremost of importance. The second is major power competition, a new era of major power competition, which plays out as well, as we all know. The third is the U.S. purpose and role in the world, which we're also seeing applied in this kind of situation, alongside our friends and allies, of course, from the Lima Group and Latin America in particular, but also Europe and elsewhere in the world, the free world. The last is the future of the global system. And I would say regional order as well. Can it apply itself in these issues? We actually take a look at a 5th issue, and I think it applies here as well, which is how modern technologies affect that all. And can they be used by democracies to liberate people and unleash the capabilities of people, or will they be used by autocracies to control? I'm going to leave it to Jason Marczak, the remarkable director of the Arsht Latin America Center, to acknowledge the important individuals in the audience and get things going. From my part, I just want to thank Chairman Royce for being here. It's always an honor to have you at the Atlantic Council, sir. And Adrienne Arsht, the founder of the Latin America Center, as I said a little bit earlier today, this center was created for this sort of moment. And Adrienne, without having created this, we could not play the role that we're playing now. So thank you so much for that. Let me pass to Jason Marczak.
Thank you, Fred. Good morning. Buenos dias. Thank you for joining us in person or via webcast at this incredibly important moment for the people of Venezuela. We're honored today to be hosting leaders of the democratic transition in Venezuela, as well as the 3 ambassadors and Chairman Royce. First off, we aim to be tech savvy here, so if you're following today's program, please use the hashtag ACVenezuela. But first, I'd like to congratulate Carlos Vecchio, Ambassador Carlos Vecchio, Julio Borges, Gustavo Marcano, all here today on their new positions. Carlos Vecchio is the new ambassador of the interim government of Venezuela to the United States. Julio Borges, congratulations on being named yesterday as representative of the interim government of Venezuela to the Lima Group. And Gustavo Marcano is the new second in charge in representing Venezuela in the United States. For those who haven't followed Venezuela until recently, Julio, Carlos, and Gustavo assumed these positions after serving for years as distinguished leaders of the opposition and co-founders of the respective political parties. I'd also like to welcome Mayor in exile, David Smolansky, an incredible leader for Venezuela here in Washington, especially on humanitarian issues, as well as National Assembly Deputy Jose Manuel Olivares, who is here with us today as well. Please, everybody, please all stand up. You deserve a round of applause. Julio, Ambassador Vecchio, David Smolansky, Deputy Olivares is out there, Gustavo Marcano. Felicitaciones. the incredible work that all of you have been doing for years, and that is now on your plate. Moving forward, the unity right now is incredibly important, and congratulations. I want to also thank and welcome the European Ambassador to the United States, David O'Sullivan, Chilean Ambassador to the United States, Alfonso Silva, and Paraguayan Ambassador to the United States, Manuel Cáceres. As well, we are honored to be joined, as Fred mentioned, by Chairman Ed Royce, who for the last 6 years served as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Great to have you here, Chairman. We have a robust program, so I'm going to be very brief, but I want to set the stage quickly with a few key messages following last week's historic moment of Juan Guaidó assuming the interim presidency of Venezuela. One, what happens in the coming days, weeks, and months will set the trajectory of Venezuela and, frankly, the region for the next generation. In fact, in just a few hours, Venezuelans will go to the streets to support the recent announcements of the National Assembly. Two, it is imperative that as much as done is possible from the international community to help the interim government of Juan Guaidó be successful and to exert pressure on Maduro and his loyalists to let the will of the Venezuelan people succeed. Three, the interim government and the Venezuelan people need unrelenting support and assistance to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. Four, we must be mindful of the role of international spoilers who have every interest in not allowing democracy to take hold in Venezuela. And five, in all this, the Atlantic Council, the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center, is 150%, maybe even 1,000% and beyond committed to restoring democracy and to helping Venezuela carve out the future that is deserved. We've been deeply engaged in Venezuela as a part of the center, and that will only magnify at this pivotal moment. I'd like to acknowledge the leadership of Diego Area, who leads our Venezuela portfolio with Angela Chavez. And I'm now going to also give the floor to Paula Garcia Tufo, our very remarkable deputy director of the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center. She's going to captain a 30-minute conversation on Venezuelan perspectives on the interim government and the road ahead with Ambassador Vecchio, Representative Lima Group, Jorge Borges, and David Smolansky. Three Venezuelan leaders who just yesterday were with Vice President Pence thinking about the future of their country. That conversation is going to be in Spanish, so please raise your hands if you need headsets, and staff will walk around with those headsets. Following that, I will moderate a 30-minute conversation on international perspectives on the Venezuela's transition with Ambassador Sullivan, Ambassador Cáceres, Ambassador Silva, and Chairman Royce. I'll then invite both panels to come to the stage, and we will do simultaneous question and answer and be out of here just a few minutes after 10:30. So with that, I turn it over to Paula, Julio Borges, Ambassador Vecchio, and David Smolansky for the first panel. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Bueno, dado el nivel de interés, quería empezar por agradecerle a todos los que están presentes el día de hoy.
We thank everyone who's joining us live and via the webcast today. Welcome. And welcome to Carlos, Julio, and David, who have given me permission to call them by their first names. As we see, there is great interest in the events of the last 3 weeks in Venezuela. Thank you for being here. As Jason mentioned in his introduction, the world is focused on Venezuela right now, and we at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center are no exception. In fact, this always has been and will continue to be a priority for us, and will be this year and into the future, and we'll continue to work tirelessly to support democratic transition in the country. We've seen a great level of support for the National Assembly. There has been recognition around the world for Juan Guaidó as interim president of Venezuela, and there has been backing from many other countries, including some from the European Union. And for the transitional government's goals of putting an end to the usurpation of power and holding new elections. I'd like to start the conversation today by directing my first question to Carlos. How do you see the situation right now, and what would be the next steps for the interim government? Good morning, everyone. Thank you. It is very humbling for me. This is the first time that the National Assembly has had representation abroad, and I'm so pleased with the fight we've fought and the backing we've received. Thank you for helping us with this step we've taken together. There are many friends here in this room and who know that we've lost people under this dictatorship, which has just recently killed 60 people and illegally arrested hundreds, and the repression continues. But the dream of freedom is so great that we won't stop until we reach our goal. And that's where the support of the international community is so important. Without the struggle, we would not be where we are now. I was saying earlier at breakfast that there are 3 types of pressure to be exerted now. One is internal pressure, the people out in the streets, and with the leadership of President Juan Guaidó. People are seeking freedom, and they'll continue to fight for it until they achieve it. We've seen a great social and political conflict in Venezuela. Then we have the pressure from the National Assembly, the only legitimately elected institution, democratic institution in the country. And then the third type of pressure is international pressure. So where are we right now? What do we want to do? What is what we are asking the international community to support us with? First, to put an end to the usurpation of power by Nicolás Maduro. We cannot resolve the political and economic and social crisis as long as the dictatorship is in place. And this is something that we have to make clear. That is my priority, is to put an end to that and to help orchestrate international support to put an end to Maduro's dictatorship. Then we want to transition towards a stable democracy, and for that we need a constitutional transition. And here is where the National Assembly is a true asset. And it can pressure for the removal of the dictatorship, but can also lend stability to a transitional government and be able to address the humanitarian crisis in our country. And then this is where the international community can help us, especially. We want to call free and fair democratic elections. That's where we need international support. We want an orderly transition to take place in our country so that we can ease the suffering of our people. We don't want more conflict. And when there's events such as these, the regime has always played 2 cards, trying to divide, confuse, and manipulate the international community, and it always plays the dialogue card. But dialogue to them is used to manipulate, to buy time, to get the oxygen they need to fuel what they're doing. We do not agree with dialogue for manipulative purposes. We have to look at the context of what's happened in the past. We've seen it in 2014, 15, 16, 18. We're not speaking abstractly. We've seen it hasn't worked, and the international community should not be manipulated by that. We are not willing to participate in any dialogue of the type that Maduro is interested in. The only thing we will accept is our agenda? How do we negotiate his exit? And that's where the pressure has to be brought to bear. And we want elections, but not elections like those that were held on May 20th. That will just make things worse. The May 20th elections were declared illegitimate. They haven't been recognized. We want transparent, trustworthy elections for a free Venezuela. So that's the agenda that we will be pushing as our first priority. And in my role, I'm not going to lose focus. I'm going to seize the moment. And I'll state this clearly. It is a great opportunity, unlike any we've had in the past. We must seize it and not hesitate at critical moments. President Guaidó is taking great risks, as have the other deputies of the National Assembly and the people of Venezuela, and we must support them and support the dream of freedom that is tantalizingly close. And Venezuelans can sense that. They want progress, democracy, and it's coming. Thank you so much. Following on along these same lines, Julio, you've been part of this historical process. What are some of the lessons learned? Could you expand on some of the things Carlos has mentioned? Yes, well, first of all, thank you for having us all here. It took a long time, I believe, to understand what we were dealing with and whom we're still dealing with. When Fred said what I had said at breakfast, that the Berlin Wall is falling, it's just like that 30 years later. I say that because it needs to be understood what is actually happening in Venezuela. We were saying to Vice President Pence yesterday that until just a few years ago, we had to come here to explain what was going on in Venezuela, and people didn't understand, or they didn't make the decisions that needed to be made. But there's been a radical change, and now it is well known in the U.S. and across Latin America what is happening in the country. And it seemed impossible before, but people finally have seen Venezuela as basically a colony of Cuba. We've had the privilege of traveling to many countries. We've spoken with presidents of Latin America, European countries, and been in the U.S., and the questions were always, why hasn't Maduro fallen? What's going on? It seems unnatural. Why wouldn't he fall? And the answer we gave is that there were three factors that were combining in a unique way. One was the presence of the military. Second, the presence of oil, which was keeping the country afloat financially. And then there was the Cuba factor. There's been no other case in Latin America where all three factors coincided. Perhaps two or one, but not all three. And the process has been slow. We've been watching it in slow motion. Thankfully, we have Maduro, and Maduro actually destroyed everything. We've been losses of billions of barrels of oil. The country is a wreck, and he's simply kept afloat by Cuba and a handful of generals whom we could name individually. Now, in broad terms, in terms of the big picture, there are two things happening simultaneously in Latin America, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the future. So we still have Nicaragua and Cuba and Venezuela who are playing from the old Cold War handbook. And then the rest of the free world that is following the post-Cold War rules of freedom and democracy. It's like some countries are playing basketball and the others are playing soccer. What will be the outcome of the interplay of these two dynamics? We don't know, but it is very important. This process, which has just begun, and we have to be very clear with what happened with the Lima Group on January 4th, and then the United States and Europe. It's an incredibly important process, and we need to see it as something that's irreversible. It can't be otherwise. And that irreversible process must bring about, as I said at breakfast, what happened 30 years ago. Finally, the Berlin Wall is falling in Latin America. And this will open the doors to a new process where many things will have to be redefined. There'll be a new ideological prism through which we'll see the economy and human rights. And the events of Venezuela are having an impact on the overall dynamic, and hopefully we will all be playing by the same post-war rules when this comes to an end. But it can seem hard to understand. Initially, many on the left and right saw Chavez with some degree of sympathy. Cuba had its imprint on Venezuela, and after 20 years, it's taken 20 years for what is happening to come into clear focus for the international community. And now it has become obvious to many. So that's the historical context that has brought us to today, which thankfully will change the history for Venezuela and Latin America. David, I'd like to turn to you for the next question, talking about the humanitarian crisis, which is an issue that you're working on at the OAS as the coordinator of the working group working on that issue. The humanitarian crisis has led to 3.3 million Venezuelans leaving the country. It is expected that 2 more will flee in the next year. What is your vision and what are your expectations given this vast migration in light of everything that's happening now? Well, first of all, thank you to the Atlantic Council for this meeting. I've been exiled in Washington for 18 months, and I appreciate the efforts made by this think tank to discuss issues surrounding Venezuela and enabling the crisis to be on the agenda, not just in this city, but beyond Washington, D.C. Before I answer the question, I wanted to say that there is an interim government in Venezuela. That transition has begun in our country. We have an interim president, head of state, and commander of the armed forces, Juan Guaidó. And soon we will see an end to this usurpation of power, and there will be free, transparent elections, which will be celebrated not just in Venezuela, but throughout the world. The migrant and refugee crisis brought about by the Chavez and Maduro regimes is the largest that has been seen in the history of Latin America. 3.3 million migrants and refugees from Venezuela for decades. Venezuela was a country that received immigrants. In the 60s, in fact, 7% of the Venezuelan population were immigrants. Now, 13% of Venezuela's population is outside Venezuela, spread across the world. In the past 4 years, many have left. Colombia has 1 million. Ecuador has 700,000. Chile has 200,000. Brazil, more than 100,000 Venezuelans. United States, more than 500,000 Venezuelans. This is in absolute terms, and if we look in percentual terms, 10% of the island of Aruba right now is Venezuelans, and 15% of the island of Curaçao is made up of Venezuelans. These are countries that were accustomed to Venezuelan tourists. Now they're receiving them as refugees. So 5 million people, or 5,000 people are leaving daily. That amounts to 200 people per hour. So by the end of this forum, 200 more Venezuelans will have left during the time we were speaking. The best way to solve this migrant and refugee crisis is for Venezuela to fully restore democracy, regain its freedoms, have the rule of law and safety, and be a country where there are job opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities. The reason Venezuelans are leaving is firstly the humanitarian crisis created by the dictatorship with the climate of fear that it has created. Second, general violence, where more than 3,300 Venezuelans have been murdered in the last few years, when it has one of the highest homicide rates in the region, with more than 70 per 100,000. In terms of human rights, there are some of us who are exiled here. We hold different responsibilities, but we're here because we were threatened and persecuted. We've got people in the Helicoide prison. Several deputies are in exile, as Gustavo mentioned. Many of us have been removed from power, and 200 soldiers have been tortured arbitrarily.
There is also fear, and that's why people leave. I wanted to thank the governments of Latin America. We have the ambassador of Chile here, as well as representatives of other countries, for having taken in so many Venezuelans. When we have a global celebration, a regional celebration, when this comes to an end, we will thank the countries for having taken in and protected Venezuelans and integrated them into their societies. They continue to need food, health care, education, training, security, and something else that we have to actions against discrimination and xenophobia. What we cannot allow is xenophobia. While it may be targeted, as we saw in Ecuador and Bacare in Brazil, we can't allow that to grow. Latin America is not a continent or region of xenophobia, nor is it a region where we need to separate each other based on nationality. We have to continuously promote fraternity, solidarity, and put an end to any xenophobic actions. Okay, I've been told that we only have 5 minutes left. We have a lot to cover, so we want to touch on many things. I will give you the floor again. Carlos, I wanted to go back to your vision looking forward. What actions are you planning to ensure that there's rule of law that David mentioned, especially with the transition government, in terms of the appointment of representatives, as it happened in recent days? What will their role be? And in case you or anyone wants to make an announcement that we haven't heard yet, here's the time. Well, that's something I didn't say at the very outset, but it has to do with the question, what are we doing to recover democracy? Having sworn, we have our Juan Guaidó as the sworn interim president. As he is the interim president of Venezuela, on January 5th, he was sworn in as Speaker of the National Assembly. He has assumed all of the powers attributed to him by the Constitution. He swore to fulfill all of the obligations entrusted to him by the Constitution. And amongst the responsibilities he has as Speaker of the Assembly is to assume the presidency of Venezuela when there is a vacuum of power. Just To give you an example, in the American context, if you don't have a president or vice president in the United States, the Speaker of the House is the one who takes power. It's the same in Venezuela. So Juan Guaidó's position is consistent with our Constitution. He had no other choice. It wasn't about accepting it or not. This is a direct mandate ordered by the Constitution. It is something that is automatically implemented. When there is no president, the president of the National Assembly or Speaker of the National Assembly automatically assumes the presidency. This is established in the Constitution. This is a context we haven't seen anywhere else. So here's the reality. What did President Guaidó say? What has the National Assembly said? They have said that we have to recover democratic order, full implementation of the Constitution, and establish a transitional government. And I would say that there are three main elements to this. First, on a political level, we have to maintain rule of law. We can establish a separation of powers. We also have to have democratic coexistence. We have to use the National Assembly to provide stability. There are 54 different positions in the sector, as we would call it, Chavismo. For the transition, we have to find our way again as Venezuelans. We have to look at the political aspect in terms of freedoms. And from an economic standpoint, there are different elements. We have to economically recover in Venezuela. This year, there will be 10 million% inflation. That's the figure. This is astronomical. So we have to recover our energy sector, the oil sector, so that we can attend to the humanitarian crisis. Almost 90% of people are living at the poverty threshold. And we have to make sure that people can take advantage of economic opportunities. This is what we want to do, but doing so always consistent with the rule of life and this democratic coexistence that I mentioned. Return stability to Venezuela. And once again, we have to call for free and fair elections as quickly as possible so that we can elect a new president as established by the Constitution. Julio, something very controversial is the need for the support of the military for the transition. So what has the National Assembly done? They voted in favor of a law on amnesty. What has been the reaction today by the military and the public? And I would ask you to be very brief and concise in your response, but we will give you another opportunity to speak and to ask a series of questions, because I'm sure this is of interest to everyone. Just very briefly, before we were talking about the three ingredients, the three pillars, included the military. I want to be very clear. If right now Maduro is still standing, he hasn't the Berlin Wall hasn't fallen completely, but I don't want you to think that the military are fully supporting Maduro now, and not even in recent times. The government has even had to admit that in the last year there have been 7 attempts at coup d'etats. As David Semolansky was saying, there are several officers, the elite, who have been imprisoned. They have detained and are brutally torturing some officers. So the military plays an extremely important role. But let's be clear, without exaggerating, 99.9% of the military do not support Maduro. But we understand if they do not react, it's because they have been had their hamstrung by a system that doesn't allow them to operate as they will, and that has prevented them from now to engage in a process amongst Venezuelans. It's something that's been delayed. So there are 10 generals who hold the key to maintaining the status quo, plus Cuba. We have to be laser focused and put an end to that very fragile support of the military. Okay, during Q&A, we will give you the floor again. I wanted to thank all three of you for your participation in this panel. I wanted to reiterate our support from the Atlantic Council in Washington. The international community is all present here today. We have representatives of the private sector, representatives of the media here today, representatives of other think tanks. You have our support. And of course, you have the support of the Atlantic Council. Thank you very much.
I'd like to now welcome the second panel to the stage, please. Three ambassadors and Chairman Royce. Again, Ambassador Vecchio, David Smolansky, Julio Borges will all be available for audience Q&A after we conclude this panel in about 30 minutes. I'd like to turn now to the role of the international community in supporting the interim government. First, I want to again also acknowledge the tremendous efforts Ambassador Vecchio, Julio Borges, David Smolansky, others in the room have done at this critical moment, and all the work that has been done leading up to this critical moment and will be done afterwards. I'm delighted to now welcome four speakers whose leadership on the role of the international community and the global implications of the situation is absolutely critical. It's an incredible honor to host them here. I think the first time I could probably say that the EU ambassador, Paraguayan ambassador, Chilean ambassador, and House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman have shared the stage together. So this is truly a remarkable moment. Ambassador David O'Sullivan, at my far left, is the EU ambassador to the United States. He has brilliantly steered the EU's relationship with the United States since 2014. Ambassador Alfonso Silva is the Chilean ambassador to the United States. He arrived here in Washington in September after many positions of the Chilean Foreign Ministry. Next to him is Chairman Ed Royce, the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman for the last 6 years and the representative in California for almost about 30 years before that, Chairman, more or less. And then next to me is Ambassador Manuel Cáceres, who is the Paraguayan ambassador here in the United States and just arrived here, just arrived in January. It's a privilege to have you for this important discussion. Similar to the first panel, we're going to keep the conversation to 30 minutes, and then we'll invite all three of the first panelists, along with Paula, back to the stage. Ambassador Sullivan, I'd like to start with you. There's a lot of interest on the role of the European Union at this critical moment. The number of EU member states gave Maduro a deadline of this coming weekend. How do you see the role of the EU at this critical moment?
Well, Jason, thank you very much, and thank you to the Atlantic Center, and in particular to Adrienne Arsht Center for Latin America for organizing this fantastic event, and it's a great honor to be here on behalf of the European Union. I think we all have a sense, as Fred said at the beginning, of a historical moment, and I think I'd also like to thank the three panelists from Venezuela, because ultimately this is about the people of Venezuela. It's about their future, and I think we were all very moved by those interventions. I think we have a sense of being at a moment in history, and I think that is felt strongly in Europe as it is here. I think we've always been on the same page. I bumped into Dan Fried, a good friend, and we were saying a rare moment of transatlantic unity on an important policy issue, and I think this is absolutely true. I think we absolutely share the same objective here. The European Union has always believed that the situation in Venezuela is unsustainable. We did not accept the results of the so-called elections last year. We declined collectively to attend the inauguration, and we are fully supportive of the efforts of the National Assembly and Guaidó to restore true democracy and free and fair elections. And also I was particularly struck by the intervention of David we're also aware of the suffering that the Venezuelan people are going through and the dramatic humanitarian crisis which is there, not just in particularly in Venezuela, but also with consequences, as was said, for the neighbors. We've actually made some 55 million euros, $62 billion available for humanitarian support in the region. But we are fully behind this effort of the international community to produce free and fair elections, enabling the people of Venezuela to choose their own future, and doing that as quickly as is possible. We have issued the statement that you saw. We will wait to see what is the reaction. There will be important discussions tomorrow amongst European foreign ministers in the Gymnich format, an informal meeting of foreign ministers. This will be one of the top items. Federica Mogherini has been actively engaged in conversations with countries in the region and with the United States. So we are fully signed up to a coordinated effort of the international community to put maximum pressure in order to produce a real political process which leads to fair and free elections and a change in the very unhappy situation in which the people of Venezuela currently find themselves.
Thank you, Ambassador Sullivan, and thank you for all the tremendous efforts of the European Union at this critical moment. Ambassador Cáceres, Paraguay was the first country in the world to recognize Juan Guaidó as the interim president. Please explain, why did Paraguay decide to lead the charge here and being that first country to recognize interim government?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for the invitation. I just arrived here 10 days ago, and this is the first also time that I'm here with you, and it's an honor talking about Venezuela and being with Venezuela. It's just the right thing to do. We are a young, vibrant democracy for the last 30 years, and Venezuela has always been a bright spot and light in Latin America regarding freedom. And it's they are suffering. They are suffering in a ways that we cannot imagine. Their bravery sets an example for all of us, and we should stand by them. And we are doing the right thing. We have been doing that. Not only that, President Abdo, from the first day when he was inaugurated 5 months ago, mentioned expressly that he was going to be with the people of Venezuela. And Dictator Maduro assumed irregularly, illegally on January 10th. Paraguay, 10 minutes after that, broke diplomatic relations with Venezuela. We will stand by them, and we think that there's no other way in the region, in the hemisphere, until democracy prevails. And this is a way to show our support. We know what this means. We stand with them, and we're ready to follow their lead. And big change also, we have to acknowledge the decision taken by the U.S. administration regarding the economic funds, and that is also a big push for the Lima Group and for all of the countries that are working side by side with Venezuela.
Thank you. Ambassador Silva, Chile has been a critical regional leader on the need to restore democracy, incredible leadership by President Piñera and the Lima Group. What steps can Chile take now to best support the interim Guaidó government?
Yes, thank you very much, Jason, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for allowing us to participate in this important forum. Just allow me to stress our commitment to the freedom of Venezuela. And this is not only because we stand for freedom, democracy, and human rights, but also because we have a debt with Venezuela. We live a period of time in which we had a dictatorship, and we had the Venezuelan government extended its hand. The Venezuelan people received a fairly high amount of exiles from Chile. I could see here in the same room there is at least one prominent Chilean that was exiled and received in Venezuela, a former minister of the regime of President Allende and a former minister of President Lagos. That's. I'm sorry that I'm diverting this, but I have to say that this is a very major, a very major reason for us to stand on the side of the Venezuelan government of President Guaidó and his people. What can we do? Yes, we can, and I think that for instance, there is a terrible situation when we had a vote in the OAS a few days back, and we lost a resolution for one vote. It was approved a declaration, yes, but it could have been a resolution that the OAS could have been recognizing the government of President Guaidó in that occasion, but we didn't. We failed over one vote. So we are not doing our work, our job well. We should commit ourselves to put more pressure, to put more diplomacy on talking to countries that, in the region itself even, which are not yet convinced that they should support what the effort of the people of Venezuela is doing with President Guaidó and the National Assembly. That is one of the issues with that. Then, of course, we are very much concerned with the humanitarian crisis. The government of Maduro is not even recognizing the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis. So we should focus on provided relief and forcing that regime to receive that kind of humanitarian aid. And of course, when a country does not recognize the situation, and we have denounced some of the countries of Latin America, the regime of Maduro in the International Criminal Court. I think other countries should also support that effort and do that, because when you amount a situation in which you're starving your people, you're killing your people for the lack of medicine, for the lack of treatment, for the lack of food, that is amount to kind of genocide. And this is an issue that is very serious, and we should work on that.
Thank you, Ambassador Silva. Incredibly important point, and the fact that as we look at what's happening right now in this coming days and weeks, the important role of supporting the Venezuelan people and alleviating the suffering of the Venezuelan people must be front and center. Chairman Royce, you traveled extensively as House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman to the region. You've spoken eloquently about the broader global importance of what's happening in Venezuela right now. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as the role of the global community and the broader importance. Fred mentioned this at the outset as well, on why democracy must be restored in Venezuela now.
Let me explain the crisis situation from the standpoint of the people in Venezuela. Elliot Engel and I have been working for some time on trying to get food into Venezuela. And as you know, he has an initiative in which we in the United States, along with NGOs around the world, would attempt to bring food into the country. In Venezuela, Maduro, his military, controls the importation of food and of medicine. And a few years ago, when the people in Venezuela elected the National Assembly over two-thirds opposition to Maduro, he doubled down by asking China to bring the ZTE Corporation in and do a social credit system inside Venezuela on the same basis that it's done in China, which means that you now need that card in order to get food or medicine or your pension or your basic services. So as we travel across the region, I was recently in Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, the explanation given to me was the same we've heard in Colombia and Mexico and in Peru. We are having people, 3.3 million human beings, coming across the border. The NGOs tell us that 80% of the people inside Venezuela are not getting enough food. The problem is that if you go on social media, and it's all connected through the database maintained by this ZTE and Chinese military intelligence, along with help from Cuban intelligence, they monitor whether or not on your social media you are supportive of the regime. If you are not, the jail term can be up to 5 years if you criticize the government. In those situations, the jails themselves are at overcapacity. 83,000 people in jails, 60% don't have potable water. So the disease that is caused, tuberculosis, was wiped out. 400,000 cases now of malaria, 400,000 cases of malaria. TB is on the rise. So the governments in the region tell us, we've got to get food into the people in this kind of a system. And I would go further than that. The fact that this ZTE type arrangement exists in Venezuela, and now it exists in North Korea, and there's one other country where they have a contract They're putting it in the Republic of Iran. This represents a new challenge to democracies because on the system they know your political party. And the goal from the perception of those who want authoritarian rule is to break the back of parliaments, to do away with a balance of power, do away with powers in the court by packing the court through the executive branch. That's what's happened in Venezuela. That's why historically it's so important that the people are all now standing up and the National Assembly is saying this is the action we're going to take. Democratic countries around the world have to support this, and we support it in a bipartisan way in Congress.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your leadership on the issue, especially this critical moment, the bipartisan leadership. Ambassador Sullivan, I want to move back to you. As I mentioned, the UK, France, Spain, Germany set a deadline last weekend for Nicolás Maduro, announce elections in 8 days, free and fair elections, or they will recognize Juan Guaidó as interim president. If Guaidó is recognized by these member states and other EU's countries, what additional actions, looking forward, what additional actions could we expect to come at that moment from the European Union and from individual member states with a potential shift in recognition to the new government?
Well, as you say, this deadline is there. There will be an important discussion with our 28 foreign ministers tomorrow. You appreciate trying to get 28 countries all on exactly the same line is sometimes a little challenging, but I think there is no fundamental disagreement as to the objective. There is some nuances between our member states on the precise tactics, but I think the objective is to have a common European position, which is always much stronger. And of course, people are listening very closely to what the representatives of the National Assembly are saying, to what the countries in the region. I think the European approach is the same, I think, as we all share the same approach. It is a mixture of pressure and process. We have to put the pressure on to achieve the necessary change, but we also require, as was said very clearly by the Venezuelan representatives earlier, we need a process which enables them to set up in good conditions the correct elections in order to have a return to true democracy and to address with a new government which can address the very real problems which Chairman Royce has just described and which was described by the Venezuelan people. One idea which is being considered at the European level is the idea of an international contact group. I want to be very clear. This is not about mediation. This is not about seeking to insert ourselves between Maduro and the National Assembly or President Guaido. It is simply to work with countries in the region, like-minded countries, to discuss how best we can take forward this and how we can be supportive of the National Assembly in their efforts to ensure the restoration of democracy. We will work also with the Lima Group. There'll be an important meeting on Monday of the Lima Group, and unfortunately Federica Mogherini can't attend personally, but there will be a representative of the Europeans there to explain what we are doing and listening closely to what is happening. I think it's vitally important that the international community, the like-minded countries, the democracies, work together on a common agenda of a mixture of intense pressure and what has been decided by the United States economically, I think, is an important step forward, but also helping to build a process which gets to the objective described very eloquently by Carlos Vecchio of a process leading to free and fair elections, enabling the people of Venezuela to retake control of their country and to address the very real economic and humanitarian crisis that they are currently facing.
Ambassador Sullivan, next, I want to go back to the contact group. There has been some question about what that group could do. I'd like to drill down about that in a little bit, but I want to first turn back to you, Ambassador Silva. There's also questions on what additional steps could be coordinated through the Lima Group. As Ambassador O'Sullivan mentions, the potential pressure placed on from the European Union. What additional actions could be taken by the Lima Group? What might be under consideration right now that you can share that could be tools at the disposal of this incredibly important group of countries in the Americas?
Yeah, thank you very much again. I could not anticipate really what is going to be the outcome of that meeting that will take place on the 4th of February. Though at this time, at this moment, the national coordinators of the Lima Group are working on a statement that will become a declaration with measures that will comprehensive measures that will consider political and financial pressure on the Maduro regime, and of course also diplomatic coordination that will focus on contacting a group of countries that are still pending to provide their support to the administration of President Guaidó. I won't go any farther because I think that this is to the Lima group to announce after their meeting.
Well, Ambassador Carson, is the January 4th statement of the Lima group was fundamental, right, and helping to get in motion where we are today. Could you explain a little bit more about that statement? But then also, of significant concern is the increased violence, repression that could very well be forthcoming, even beginning in a couple hours when Venezuelans go into the streets at 11 a.m. Washington time, 12 p.m. in Caracas, to voice their support for some of the policies that have already come out of the National Assembly. Upwards of 40 people have already died in the last week. If you could explain a little about that statement, but then also how should countries be prepared to respond to significant acts of violence or repression by Maduro and his cronies?
Well, Jason, the Lima group has been working not only the last month, but it's been more than a year, and it's always been instrumental. There's been a very good coordination, and it was always very clear that the goal was to restore democracy in Venezuela. It has been a long work, like I said, and the pressure has to be mounting. There's going to be an important meeting in Canada on the 4th, and of course, working with a legitimate representative of the Venezuelan people. Their voice is important to us. And dictators don't go out easily. They don't take the plane, they don't go home, and especially when they are cornered. They become violent, and unfortunately, who's going to pay is the brave Venezuela people who's on the streets right now. So we think that is paramount pressure, international pressure. Dictators do not want to be pressured. They look to the international community. And we have to bring around some countries. Some democratic countries in the region, unfortunately, are not there yet with us, and we have to keep working with them. We need the OAS. It is the political body of the region, and we need more countries to join us, and we have to keep working in that sense.
Pastor Cos, you said dictators don't go out easily, and that brings me to you, Chairman Royce. We can't forget about the importance of Russia, Turkey, you mentioned China, and propping up Maduro. On Friday, reports came out that Russia has sent 400 military contractors to Venezuela. We found the Atlantic Council last week in monitoring the January 23rd protest that one of the most popular pro-Maduro hashtags actually originated out of Turkey. How do you see the broader global geopolitical interests at play in Venezuela right now?
I think, Jason, the reality is that there is a struggle between regimes that believe in authoritarian rule and want to block the idea of a check and balance system. The systems that we have in much of Latin America and the United States and Europe is a check and balance in which you have duly elected parliamentarians and you have a system where the courts are independent. And it's important to understand that Turkey, certainly Putin, Beijing under Xi especially, are trying to consolidate all of the power. And with it, as I mentioned earlier, this concept of control of social media and the ability of doing a social credit system where the state grants you, your pension or your food and medicine, and it is controlled as a means of controlling the individual. So what's actually in play here is a titanic struggle over the ideal of really guaranteeing individual rights, human rights. And I think that one of the things that might be very beneficial is if, and I've talked to other governments in Latin America about this, provide a platform for ideas for Venezuelans to hear through radio. Why? Because the freedom of speech on radio and television has been controlled now for many years by Maduro. So people really cannot hear or understand the truth on a lot of information. And this, I think, is a way in which other governments, neighboring governments in the region, could actually assist the members of the National Assembly, duly elected, and others to get their voices out. Because it's going to be a battle of ideas in which freedom of speech and independence in the judiciary is essential. We saw the situation with Justice Ortega, where the Attorney General was very close to Maduro, but she was really taken by the fact that there were so many human rights abuses. And when she became involved in trying to overturn that as Attorney General, what happened? They took her out of that job. She had to flee the country, and all of those cases were reversed. So it is this check and balance system we have to fight for, we have to explain, and we have to empower people. And then lastly, I would just close with all of the countries in the region, all the democracies in the region need to get food, again, into the people. Do not allow Maduro to block the food. Make it clear to the people. Make it clear to the people of Venezuela that for years now, Maduro has said no to humanitarian assistance, so it all could be controlled by the military. It's time to overcome that control.
Both controlled by the military as well as used for corrupt purposes by the regime. Ambassador Sullivan, I want to turn back to you for his last question. We're looking forward. We have a few minutes here. You were mentioning beforehand the idea of a contact group. Can you explain in a little bit more detail what would be the purpose of such a group? What would be its intentions? What would it try to achieve? I think that would be additional clarity would be helpful and thinking through as well. Any last comments? I know you have to leave and can't stay for the question and answer, but any last questions that you have comments on the role of the European Union moving forward?
Well, thank you. I mean, I think this idea, which will be discussed tomorrow at the meeting of European foreign ministers, and there may be an announcement, so I don't want to prejudge what will be finally decided. But the fundamental idea is to bring together a group of like-minded countries from the EU and from the region to discuss how we take this situation forward and to provide support for the process of a transition from the current unsustainable, unacceptable situation to a genuine process of in putting in place democratic elections and restoring the kind of democracy that Chairman Royce has just described. So that's the objective. It is not, just to be very clear, it is not seeking to insert itself as a mediation process. It will work very closely with all the countries, the Lima Group, the United States, others, to work together so that we have a joined up approach of the international community towards the common objective, which I think is absolutely shared, which is to end the suffering of the Venezuelan people and to see a true restoration of democracy. It is clear, and I think the sense is here today, but I'm sure this is felt more widely, that we are at a historic moment. It's a huge opportunity. It is also, as has been said, not without some risks that this could end badly, or that if mismanaged, this could result in even more suffering for the Venezuelan people. And I think the challenge, and there's much work to be done in the days and weeks ahead, is how we work with the President Guaidó and the National Assembly and the forces in Venezuela, with the international community, to ensure as far as possible a peaceful and successful transition from the current unsustainable situation to a brighter future and democratic future for the people of Venezuela. And the contact group is one element in this, which we think could be helpful, but it will be part of this broader process which we've been describing this morning.
Thank you, Ambassador Sullivan. Ambassador Silva, a question for you: why is the support of for Chile, for the Lima Group, and Ambassador Costa, if you want to weigh in here as well, why is the support of the European Union so important for the steps being taken in the region to restore democracy? We've been looking at we're looking at where the European Union is going, looking at this weekend on EU member states lining up to announce their recognition of Juan Guaidó as president. Why is this so critical for your efforts in the region?
Well, Ambassador Sullivan has addressed already the issue. as far as I know, we still are not member of the European Union, so I won't like to take I won't take his issue. But of course, the European Union is a major player in world affairs, and of course, has been a presence in the region, has been cooperating with the region for a long time. So effectively, it's instrumental to the process that the European Union will come into it, and it's in the process to do so. Ambassador Sullivan has already explained that it's not easy to have a consensus for 28 countries. There are different approaches, different nuances that have to be taken in consideration, and I think that is the right track. The issues we discuss, and hopefully we will have a good news soon enough that we will have when the terms comes to an end. I think that announcements will come. But I just want to address, if I may, something that Julio said, that the coup d'etat that Maduro plays and Chavez plays in Venezuela was a silent coup d'etat, which effectively is so. So I just to bring out the reality of that process that took place, in which we stood by looking at it, and we did nothing. I mean, step by step, the Venezuelan regime was dismantling the democracy in that country, which was one of the strongest democracies in the region. And step by step, it addressed the issue, block by block, dismantling that democracy and established himself as a dictatorship for Chavez and then Maduro. And we did nothing. The Democratic Charter of the US, yes, provided a good basis for it, but it needs to be strengthened to address this kind of problems. We cannot allow a regime that might have been elected democratically, that has destroyed its check and balances, as Chairman Royce has said, that were in place in Venezuela, and then become a dictatorship. And this is something that we must be aware of and may be addressed in time. Thank you.
And I want to give Ambassador Casas the opportunity to also respond on the part of Paraguay, why it's so important. Also, I want to throw out a last question to you on what other actions can countries around the world, beyond the Americas, beyond the European Union, what actions can countries take to support the important work of Latin America's major democracies at this critical time?
Well, we look to the European Union. We have shared values, democracy, human rights, and of course their voice is always important. And we always have been working with them. I just want to also say that in the region for a long time we have these progressive governments that were elected, yes, democratically, but once they were elected, they started undermining the basic rules of democracy. And they reformed their constitution. They stayed there for a very long time. Some of them tried to stay there indefinitely. And that is one thing that we have to work with. There was this famous Foro de Sao Paulo, which was a mastermind of all these ideas. And at a given point, so many of them shared the same views. But if you look at the map of especially South America this time, it's a very changing and challenging time. And we are sure that democracy will prevail. And to the rest of the countries in the world, just join us, express your voice, and stay by the side of the Venezuelan people who are suffering and who has to recover their freedom. And freedom in the end always prevails. So yes, it takes a while. There is a very, very big cost for it. We see that in Venezuela, but we have no doubt that this freedom Venezuela will be free again. It started the process, and we hope it ends very soon.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank this panel, Ambassador Sullivan, Ambassador Silva, Ambassador Casas, Chairman Royce, for your leadership, your international leadership at this fundamental moment. And Ambassador Sullivan, you have to depart, but at this moment, please join me in thanking this panel. And I'd like to invite back up to the stage Ambassador Vecchio, Julio Borges, David Smolensky, and Paula Garcia.
It's a pleasure. I will try to reach out to you. Okay.
We'll try.
So looking around the room, I'm sure there might be one or two questions. So we will take those in short order. I will take the first round of questions, and then the Senator Deputy Paula Garcia Tufo will take a second round of questions. and we'll give as much opportunity as we can. We probably won't get to all those questions, but we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. If you could say fourth row here, if you could say your name and affiliation, we'll take a couple questions together and then address them simultaneously. And please keep your questions not to commentary, but just a question. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Alec Boyd. I'm a blogger from Venezuela, and this is a question from the point of view of corruption and the amnesty law that has been commented about. So my question to Julio, Carlos, and David is exactly how this offer amnesty to generally in Venezuela is going to work out, specifically with the people that have been involved in narco trafficking, in rampant corruption, in violations of human rights, and have brought the country to this place. Thank you.
Thank you, Alec. We'll take a couple more questions together. In the same row, four down. If you could say your name and affiliation.
I'm Timothy Tell, retired U.S. diplomat, 30 years in the State Department, in governments, all dictatorships. I was taking notes. Ambassador Sullivan talked about peace, stressed peacefulness. The ambassador of Paraguay, 30 years ago this weekend, they overthrew the dictator, talked about dictators don't go out early. This week in Caracas, there's supposed to be a major demonstration about those wonderful people. And if you read your morning paper, and I know everybody here does, you will see that the thugs of Maduro, guided by Cuban professionals, were kicking down doors, beating up and torturing people. What is this international community and these distinguished citizens that we're looking at today going to do this week when the Maduro thugs start beating up human beings?
Thank you. And pass the microphone right in front of you to Stephen Donahue, please.
Thank you very much for being here. Stephen Donahue from McClarty Associates. Could you talk a little more specifically about your intentions for recovering the economy and how and who will be put in charge of especially the energy sector, PDVSA and Citgo?
Okay, thank you, Steve. We'll take those three questions together. How will the amnesty work, the role of the international community in responding to continued violence, repression by Maduro, and economic recovery? We'll start with the Venezuela questions first. Ambassador Becky, would you like to start on those? Or Julio?
The amnesty law. No, from the amnesty law, which has been focused on the military side, I share with you what you said. We believe in the amnesty, but except in cases of crime against humanity. So we need to be very clear on that. And particularly, and I would like to highlight that, against that amnesty law cannot apply for the people who are, the officers who are killing the people right now on the streets. We are saying those officers who are willing to accept our authority and to and willing to restore democracy, so the amnesty law will apply to them, and we will recover our country with them. But those people who have committed crime against humanity, I mean, the amnesty law will not apply, and especially, again, for the people who are killing our Venezuelans on the streets.
Julio, can you address the economic recovery in PDVSA?
No, this is a topic that is dealing with Carlos as ambassador here.
Yes, as I said, I mean, this is a process. We want to just end the usurpation of power. That's the main priority. Then we want to have a transitional government and an election, then to recover our country. But just to be very clear, I mean, from the economic point of view, we believe in an open market, an open economy. We believe in the private sector. We believe in the international and the national sector. So, and often, of course, our main source of revenue is the oil sector. So that will be a key element to recover our country. And we need to open that market. We need to increase our oil production. The state doesn't have the money, so we will need national and private sector to get involved. But we need to do that in a transparent manner. and also keeping in mind that the revenues that we got from the oil has to be invested in our economy, but at the same time in the people who need to be helped because of the humanitarian crisis. So I think we will have a huge opportunity in that sector. And they have destroyed everything, so we have to rebuild everything, so we will need a lot of people on helping us. And we want to just communicate this. We want to have a democracy. We need to bring political stability to our country. We want to restore democratic coexistence. That's a key element in our equation, because otherwise you won't be able to transmit confidence to the rest of the people, particularly in the economic sector. And we need to do that, and we would like to do that in a friendly manner. So there are a lot of issues. We are fully aware of that. We have set a team with different backgrounds working on that right now. We have a plan, we have ideas, and you will hear about this very, very soon, and in order to address this important element for the recovery of Venezuela, and to communicate a confidence on what we are doing and what we want to achieve in the near future.
Thank you. The other question on the role of the international community: what is the international community prepared to do to respond to continued acts of violence by Maduro? One of the ambassadors, would you like to take that question, Chairman?
I think that it is key that we utilize NGOs and get them into the country, onto the ground immediately. I talked earlier about the situation in the prison systems. Today, I assume others are going to be put in prison. The Red Cross has not been able to visit any prisons for the last 6 years, and I spoke about the conditions in those prisons. Now is the time for the international community to insist in a way in which we're not deploying force directly, but we are bringing moral force through presenting on the border the food, the medicine, the NGOs that need to go in and force the issue, and we should do it simultaneous. And I think we should all do it shoulder to shoulder. And I think that governments, left, right, and center, all who support democracy, should be united in this effort. It should be a worldwide effort. And I believe it should be led by governments across Latin America. And I can tell you from my meetings with the Lima Group and the OAS and other associations there, and speaking individually with those governments, and regardless of political party down there, there is a feeling that we must engage immediately on this. So that would be my recommendation.
Paul, over to you for the next round of questions.
I'm going to take 3 more questions from the audience. I'm going to look to this side of the room. I see a question in the middle, the young lady in the middle by the aisle. I'm going to take this gentleman in the front, and I'm going to take a question up front.
Good morning. I had a question for
Please
Congress.
say your name and affiliation.
My name is Melila Grain. I'm an independent journalist. I had a question for Congressman Royce and for Carlos Vecchio. What is your assessment of the appointment of Elliot Abrams as the special envoy of the United States to Venezuela, considering his backing of dirty wars in Central America in the 80s?
Thank you. Gentleman in the front, 2 rows up.
Yeah, I'm Frank Alzona with the Center for Free Cuba. Question is for Chairman Royce. What can the U.S. Congress do to help now?
Great, and one last question up front.
Emily Meredith with Energy, and I'm a reporter with Energy Intelligence, and my question is for Carlos Vecchio, which is one of the biggest things that the Trump administration has done is to cut off payments, like for the oil sector. Do you all have a sense of when you'll be able to access those blocked accounts, how that process will work, and then whether or not contracts that were approved in Venezuela without the approval of the National Assembly, like from 2015, if those will be considered valid?
So we've got 3 questions. I'm going to take the liberty of adding one more because I owed David a question. So I'm going to add a question about the humanitarian situation, and again, really hammer home the point that the chairman made in terms of the human impact in Venezuela, and just provide you with an opportunity to talk about what can we expect to see on the humanitarian front. But we've got assessment of the appointment of Elliott Abrams on the part of the United States, a question about what more can the U.S. Congress do, and again, the question around the oil sanctions, asset recovery of those assets that are currently being frozen.
Okay, regarding the decision or the appointment of Elliott Abrams, is a independent decision from the U.S. government. I respect that, and I'm willing to work with him. Actually, I met with him recently, and I just proposed to him our agenda, and we want to get the support of the U.S. administration and from Elliott Abrams on our agenda. And I'm willing to work with him, and I'm willing to work, as we are doing right now, with the group, Lima Group, and also with the European Union. So we have been very clear with our agenda, and we will continue pushing our agenda. We will be asking to support what we have presented to the Venezuelan people. So we have been very transparent on that. And in the second question, I mean, as you know, this is no irregular situation. This is a unique situation. It's a very complex moment. We have an urgent agenda that, as I just mentioned, I mean, we want to achieve as soon as possible the change in order to conduct a smooth transition in Venezuela. That will be the perfect scenario for us and for the people of Venezuela, because in that sense, we can stop the suffering immediately. And so that's what we want to achieve. But taking into account the decision that have been taken by the U.S. government, I mean, first of all, what we want to do is just preserve the asset of the Venezuelan people. If we want to control them in the near future, and we want to increase, for example, the oil production, Citgo will be a key element for us. And we need to preserve it, and we need to keep that operation running, because that will be for the benefit of the Venezuelans. So the first thing is to control or to protect the assets, because otherwise they will just destroy that. A lot of corruption, a lot of mismanagement, and so something that we wanted to do was that, just block them, protect them for the Venezuelan people. Second, we want to do we have been discussing this, we want to do a progressive control over the assets, and orderly, and following legal procedures inside of the United States, and following also the administrative procedures. So that will take time, but I want to do this very transparent. We want to show how a government could be, and we want to use the National Assembly as the only elected institution to conduct this process in order to show accountability of what we are receiving, the condition in which we are receiving those assets, and how we can manage them in a transparent manner before the Venezuelan people. So we need a little bit of time. I mean, we got here yesterday. And we know the issues. We have our clear concerns, and we are just dealing with that.
Thank you. Chairman, would you like to address the U.S. Congress?
Just final comment.
Yes.
And we have said that many times, nothing now, a long time ago. Those agreements that has not been recognized by the National Assembly, who has been illegal, we will not recognize illegal agreements. The rest, yes, we will comply with that. And let me send a clear message. For example, the only way that bondholders will not get paid if Maduro remains in power. Nobody will complain with them. And China has to understand that, and Russia has to understand that. So illegal agreements will not be recognized by the National Assembly or for the new government. So it's quite important to highlight that.
Thank you.
First, on the question of what has Congress done, back in 2014, Maduro wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. I wrote a rebuttal, which was published to those points. And in terms of our actions in the House, as you know, we have worked on Eliot Engel's idea of transferring food aid and medicine at the border into the hands and across the border into NGOs to transfer that directly to the people. In terms of what we have done in actions to ratchet up the pressure, like the Atlantic Council, we've looked at every option in the House, had many debates. I can think of 8 of them that I've been engaged in the last session. And what clearly we're doing now is to prevent the transfer of assets into the hands of Maduro's military at this point in time, and instead saying no, those assets are frozen. They belong to the people of Venezuela. And in terms of those foreign policy people who've been involved with experience in the past in Latin America, yes, we have a diversity of people with experiences that the administration has put into these positions. But at this point, if you want my overall judgment, the decisions that have been taken are the correct ones in terms of freezing these assets and applying this pressure. So those would be my responses.
Thank you. And finally, I'll give the word to David. What can we expect in terms of the state of the humanitarian situation?
Well, to reiterate, 3.3 Venezuelan migrants or refugees as we speak. It's the second largest population of refugees in the world. Only Syria is above Venezuela, and this has happened in just 4 years with no war, no natural catastrophe. There are more Venezuelan refugees than South Sudan or Somalia. And if the humanitarian crisis continues and the dictatorship continues, by the end of the year will be more than 5 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees. And actually, I could say this on a report that we're working in the OAS, and with one of our independent experts, Dani Bahar, is that if this situation could get even worse by 2020, with the combination of the hyperinflation, more than 10 million % for this year, no producing oil, it could get to more than 7 million Venezuelan migrants and refugees by 2020, which will mean the 25% of the population. So we cannot fail here. As I said at the beginning, a new government has started in Venezuela. A transition has started in Venezuela. There is an interim president, and the sooner we recover democracy in Venezuela, the better for the region. The sooner we recover freedom in Venezuela will be better for the migrants and refugees, because it will decrease those migration flows, but at the same time will motivate many people to go back. I'm just going to finish with this in español. Yo solamente sueño como alguien que tiene 18 meses exiliado.
As somebody who's been in exile for 18 months, and I'm part of a generation where we have had to say farewell to our friends and families in the airport or in the bridge in Cúcuta. I see many Venezuelans here who have lived in this city for many years or in other parts of the United States. Let's envision a time when we can get on a plane in Washington, Miami, and New York, and the international airport of Maiquetía will be filled with flights of Venezuelans who are returning, and that the bridge that connects Cúcuta with Venezuela. So instead of seeing people going to Colombia, see people returning from Colombia to Venezuela. Let's imagine that time when we can embrace our parents, our children, or our best friends who we haven't seen in so many years. I think this is in the near future, and that will be the most satisfying moment once we are able to rid ourselves of the dictatorship.
Thank you, David. Everybody here, we are all here 100% in to work with Venezuela and making sure that that becomes a reality. I want to give the opportunity for Julio Borges to have a final word before we wrap up. Julio?
Well, thank you. Well, finally, I would like to thanks again in the name of Venezuela, Carlos and David and all the Venezuelan people, the support and the opportunity. Something that we didn't talk too much, but it's very important, is the issue of humanitarian help. We really believe that it could have a huge impact if we really move quickly regarding the humanitarian aid to Venezuela. Next Monday, there will be the meeting of the Lima Group in Ottawa, and our chief aim is to put the issue of humanitarian help as the very center of the next steps in Venezuela. This is not only for the tragic situation that we are living as a country, but also as a clear remark that the international community has as a final end to help Venezuelan people. That is beyond politics, this is beyond ideology. This is a matter of human dignity and human help. And in that case, we really would like and appreciate if we can join us in this fight for freedom and for dignity in Venezuela. Thank you very much.
With that, I'd like to again thank Diego Area, who leads our Venezuela work in the center, Angela Chavez, Valentina Sedar, Domingo Saruni, and the whole Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center team, Roberta Braga, who manages our media, for putting this incredibly timely event together in just a matter of frankly, hours. To do what we're trying to accomplish here, which is provide that opportunity so that this incredible transition and democracy becomes, in fact, that transition that we're all hoping that it will be, and that we provide that opportunity for the Venezuelan people moving forward. I want to, again, thank Julio Borges, Ambassador Carlos Vecchio, Ambassador Cáceres, Chairman Ed Royce, Ambassador Silva, David Smolansky, Paula Garcia Tuflo, Ambassador Sullivan, who's now departed, for joining us today. We here at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council will continue to be leading the charge on these issues. And I thank again Adrienne Arsht on the front row here, whose vision in starting this center 6 years ago has led us to where we are today. Thank you all very much.